The sky over Denver turned red when the alien ships arrived. Commander Jake Morrison stood on the rooftop of the military bunker and watched as massive vessels descended through the clouds. They were bigger than anything humans had ever built. Each one was like a floating city made of dark metal that seemed to swallow the light around it. Jake had been a soldier for 15 years. He had seen combat in 3 different countries. He thought he knew what fear looked like. But this was different. This was the end of everything he had ever known. The first attack came without warning. Bright blue beams shot down from the alien ships and struck the Air Force Base 5 miles away. The explosion was so bright that Jake had to shield his eyes. When he looked again, the entire base was gone. Just a smoking crater remained where thousands of people had been working moments before. All around the world, the same thing was happening. The aliens hit every major military target within the first hour. Bases, aircraft carriers, missile silos, command centers. They knew exactly where everything was. They had been watching Earth for a long time. Jake's radio crackled with desperate messages from units across the country. Everyone was asking the same questions. What do we do? How do we fight back? But nobody had answers. The human military tried to fight. Fighter jets scrambled from the bases that were still standing. Ships fired missiles from the oceans. Ground forces launched everything they had. Nothing worked. The alien ships had shields that made the weapons bounce off like raindrops. When humans managed to hit them with nuclear weapons, the missiles just exploded harmlessly against invisible barriers. The aliens barely seemed to notice. By the end of the first day, the defense networks were gone. By the end of the second day, most of the world's armies had been destroyed. By the third day, the government started surrendering. Jake watched it all happen from the bunker in Colorado. His commander, General Patricia Hayes, had ordered him to fall back to the underground facility when the invasion started. Now Jake and 30 other soldiers were hiding 200 feet below ground while the world ended above them. The bunker had thick concrete walls and enough supplies to last for months. It also had communication equipment that let them listen to what was happening across the planet. Jake wished they didn't have that equipment. Hearing the desperate calls for help that nobody could answer was worse than not knowing anything at all. On the third night, the global broadcast came through. The Secretary General of the United Nations appeared on every screen that still worked. His face was pale and his hands were shaking. He read from a prepared statement. The nations of Earth have agreed to unconditional surrender. The Zathran Empire has demonstrated overwhelming military superiority. Further resistance will only lead to unnecessary loss of life. All military forces are ordered to stand down immediately. All civilians are ordered to cooperate fully with Zathran occupation forces. This is not the end of humanity. This is our survival. The transmission ended. Jake sat in the communications room and stared at the blank screen. Around him, other soldiers were crying or cursing or just sitting in silence. Lieutenant Amy Foster, Jake's second-in-command, stood beside him with her arms crossed. "So that's it," she said. "We just give up?" Jake didn't answer. He didn't know what to say. What could anyone say? They had lost. Humanity had lost. The aliens were too strong, too advanced, too prepared. But then another message came through. This one was encrypted with old military codes. It took Jake 10 minutes to decrypt it. When he finally got it open, he found a short message from General Hayes. She had sent it just before communications went dark at NORAD. The message contained only 3 words. Remember the Sentinel. Jake read it 5 times. He had no idea what it meant. He had been in the military for his entire adult life, and he had never heard of anything called Sentinel. He asked the other soldiers in the bunker. None of them knew either. Amy looked over his shoulder at the message. Maybe it's a code word? A rally point? Maybe, Jake said. But something told him it was more than that. General Hayes wasn't the type to send meaningless messages. If she used her last communication to mention something called Sentinel, it had to be important. Jake went to the bunker's computer room. The facility had backup servers with copies of old military databases. He started searching through files looking for any mention of Sentinel. There were dozens of projects with that name. Operation Sentinel from the Cold War, Sentinel surveillance programs, Sentinel defense initiatives, but none of them seemed important enough to matter now. He spent hours digging through layers of classified information. The bunker's systems had high-level access because it was built as an emergency command center. Jake used every security clearance code he knew. He went deeper into the archives than he had ever gone before. Finally, at 3 in the morning, he found something. It was buried in a folder marked Antarctic Research Division 1952-2025. The files were heavily corrupted, damaged by age and poor data management. But Jake could read enough to understand the basics. In 1952, something had crashed in Antarctica. The file called it an object of unknown origin. Research teams from multiple countries had investigated. What they found was buried deep under the ice of the Ross Ice Shelf. The object was massive. It was made of materials that didn't match anything in Earth's geological record. And it was old, impossibly old. Scientists had studied it for decades. The file contained reports from engineers, physicists, and linguists. They all agreed on one thing. The object wasn't natural. It had been built by someone with technology far beyond human understanding. But it wasn't alien. At least not in the way people usually thought about aliens. The last report in the file was from 1987. Jake's heart nearly stopped when he saw the name at the bottom. Colonel Henry Morrison. His grandfather. Jake had never known what his grandfather did in the military. Henry had died when Jake was 12 years old. He never talked about his work. He just said it was classified and left it at that. Now Jake was reading his grandfather's words from almost 40 years ago. The vessel responds to external threats, Henry had written. We conducted 3 tests using simulated attack scenarios. Each time the vessel's system showed increased activity. We believe it is waiting for something. A specific condition must be met before it will fully activate. We don't know what that condition is. But I believe the vessel is a defense system. It's protecting Earth from something. We just don't know what yet. The report ended there. Jake searched for more files but found nothing. Either they had never been digitized or they were stored somewhere else. But he had enough information to understand what General Hayes meant. The Sentinel wasn't a project. It was a ship. An ancient ship buried under Antarctic ice. A ship that was designed to protect Earth. Jake stood up from the computer and found Amy waiting in the hallway. I need to show you something, he said. They spent the next hour going through the files together. Amy read everything twice. When she finished, she looked at Jake with wide eyes. You think this ship can help us fight the Zathran? I think General Hayes believed it could, Jake said. Otherwise, why send that message? But this was buried under ice 70 years ago. It might not even be there anymore. The Zathran have been mining Antarctica since they arrived. Jake nodded. That was true. The aliens had set up massive mining operations across the frozen continent. They were extracting rare minerals from the ice and rock. If they had found the Sentinel, they would have destroyed it or taken it. But maybe they hadn't found it. Maybe it was still there, still waiting, still listening for the threat it was built to stop. We have to go look, Jake said. We have to try. Amy was quiet for a moment. Then she smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of someone who knew they were probably going to die but didn't care anymore. Antarctica in winter, she said. Crawling with aliens. No support, no backup, no plan. Yeah, sounds perfect. When do we leave? Jake looked at the map on the computer screen. The coordinates from the file showed a location 2 miles under the ice near the Ross Ice Shelf. It was one of the most remote and hostile places on Earth. Getting there would be nearly impossible. Getting there during an alien occupation would be suicide. But what choice did they have? Earth had surrendered. Humanity was defeated. The Sentinel was their only hope. Maybe it was a foolish hope. Maybe it would lead nowhere. But Jake had to try. His grandfather had believed the ship was important. General Hayes had used her last message to point him toward it. He would go to Antarctica. He would find the Sentinel. And maybe, just maybe, he would find a way to fight back. We leave tomorrow, Jake said. Start gathering a team. 2 weeks had passed since the world surrendered. Jake Morrison stood in the bunker's briefing room with 11 other people who had agreed to join his insane mission. They were all volunteers. Nobody had to come, but everyone in the bunker wanted to do something other than hide underground while aliens stripped their planet for resources. Amy Foster stood beside Jake, pointing at a map projected on the wall. The coordinates are here, she said, marking a spot on the Ross Ice Shelf. 2 miles under the ice. The old research facility had an access tunnel, but we don't know if it's still intact. Dr. Lisa Yang raised her hand. She was a physicist who had been working on experimental aircraft engines when the invasion started. She escaped from her lab in California and made it to the bunker 3 days after the surrender. How do we even get to Antarctica? Lisa asked. The Zathran control all the airspace. They'll shoot us down before we get close. Jake had been thinking about that problem constantly. Commercial aircraft wouldn't work. Military jets wouldn't work. Everything humans had would show up on alien sensors immediately. But then Amy had an idea that was either brilliant or completely insane. We steal one of their ships, Amy said. The room went silent. Everyone stared at her. There's a Zathran supply depot in Argentina, she continued. Our satellites captured images of it before they went dark. The aliens are using it as a waypoint for their mining operations in Antarctica. Transport ships land there every few hours to refuel and load supplies. Captain Doug Martinez leaned forward. He was a former Navy SEAL who had been stationed in San Diego when the invasion started. He was one of the few Special Forces operators who made it out of the initial attacks. You want us to hijack an alien spacecraft? Doug said. With what? We don't know how to fly their ships. We don't even know if we can breathe their atmosphere. We figure it out, Amy said. Lisa is one of the smartest aerospace engineers on the planet. If anyone can crack their flight systems, it's her. Lisa looked terrified. I work on human propulsion systems. Alien technology might be completely different. It could take months to understand even the basics. We don't have months, Jake said. We barely have weeks before the Zathran finish their initial occupation. Once they settle in and establish permanent security, we'll never get another chance. This is our window. The team spent 3 days planning the raid. They studied every piece of intelligence they had on the Argentine depot. The aliens had taken over an old airport outside Buenos Aires. They kept about 20 transport ships there at any given time. Security was tight but not impossible. The Zathran didn't expect humans to attack. They thought the war was over. Jake and his team left the bunker at dawn on a cold morning. They traveled in stolen civilian vehicles, taking back roads and avoiding the alien checkpoints that now dotted every major highway. It took them 4 days to reach the border of Argentina. They crossed at night through a mountain pass that the Zathran hadn't bothered to guard. Buenos Aires was different now. Alien structures rose between the human buildings. Strange towers made of that same light-absorbing metal. The streets were mostly empty. People stayed inside unless they absolutely had to go out. Zathran patrols walked through the city in groups of 3 or 4. They were tall, maybe 7 feet, with scaled skin that shimmered in colors between green and bronze. They wore armor that looked organic, like it had been grown rather than manufactured. The team watched the depot from a warehouse a mile away. They counted the patrols, timed the ship arrivals, and looked for weaknesses. Doug found one on the second day of surveillance. They have a blind spot, he said, pointing to a section of the perimeter fence. Right there, between those 2 sensor towers. It's only about 30 seconds when the patrols aren't watching, but it's enough. The attack happened at midnight. Jake led 5 people through the blind spot, while Amy and the others created a distraction on the opposite side of the depot. They set off explosives near the fuel storage tanks. Nothing big enough to cause real damage, but loud enough to draw attention. The Zathran guards rushed toward the explosion. Jake and his team ran across the landing field toward the nearest transport ship. It was sitting idle with its cargo ramp down. Lights glowed inside the hull. They made it aboard without being seen. The interior was strange. Everything was curved, organic-looking. The walls seemed to pulse slightly, like they were alive. Lisa immediately went to what looked like a control console. Strange symbols flowed across glowing surfaces. I can't read any of this, she said, her voice shaking. Then start guessing, Jake said. He could hear shouting outside. The aliens had realized the explosion was a diversion. They would search the ships any moment. Lisa's hands moved across the controls. She pressed symbols, swiped through screens, tried to find anything familiar. Nothing happened for 30 seconds. Then the cargo ramp started to close. I think I got it, Lisa said. The ship's engines hummed to life. The whole vessel began to vibrate. Through the closing ramp, Jake could see Zathran soldiers running toward them. They were raising their weapons. Get us in the air, Jake shouted. Lisa pressed what looked like a large symbol in the center of the console. The ship lurched upward so violently that everyone fell to the floor. They shot into the sky at incredible speed. Jake crawled to a window and looked down. The depot was already far below them, shrinking to the size of a toy. I did it, Lisa said. She looked shocked that she was still alive. "I actually did it. Can you fly this thing?" Amy asked. "Fly might be a strong word," Lisa said, "but I can make it go up and down and forward. That's something." They flew south through the night. Lisa slowly figured out more of the controls. The ship had some kind of autopilot system that responded to touch commands. She managed to input coordinates by pointing at a holographic map that appeared in the air above the console. The ship flew faster than any human aircraft. They covered the distance to Antarctica in under 2 hours. As they approached the Ross ice shelf, Doug pointed out the window at something below. "Look at that." The ice was covered with alien mining equipment. Massive machines that looked like metal insects were drilling into the frozen surface. Hundreds of them, spread across miles of white landscape. The Zathran were tearing apart the continent looking for minerals. "The coordinates are near one of their main mining sites," Amy said, checking the map. "We'll have to land close." Lisa brought the ship down in a valley between two ice ridges. They were about 3 miles from the coordinates where the old research facility should be. The landing was rough. The ship bounced twice before settling into the snow, but they were down and they were alive. Jake opened the cargo ramp. Cold air rushed in immediately. It was negative 60 degrees outside. They had brought Arctic gear from the bunker, but even with the heavy coats and insulated pants, the cold was shocking. The team hiked across the ice toward the coordinates. The wind was brutal, pushing against them like a physical force. Doug led the way, using a handheld GPS unit to navigate. After 2 hours of walking, they reached the location. There was nothing there, just flat ice stretching in every direction. "The entrance should be right here," Amy said, checking the coordinates again. According to the files, there was a surface building that led down to the tunnel. "Maybe it's buried," Lisa said. "This is Antarctica. 50 feet of snow could have fallen since the last time anyone was here." They started digging. They used portable heaters to melt the ice and shovels to clear the snow. It was exhausting work. After 2 hours, Jake's arms felt like they were going to fall off. But then Doug's shovel hit something solid. "Found it!" They cleared more snow and ice away. A metal hatch appeared beneath them. It was covered in frost, but still intact. Jake found the handle and pulled. At first it didn't move. Then with a grinding sound, it opened. Warm air rushed out from below. That was impossible. The facility had been abandoned for decades. There shouldn't be any power, any heat, anything. But Jake could feel warmth on his face. "That's not normal," Amy said. Jake agreed. But they had come too far to turn back now. He clicked on his flashlight and started climbing down the ladder into the darkness below. The tunnel went down for what felt like forever. Jake counted the rungs. 200, 300, 500. Finally, his feet touched solid ground. He was standing in a corridor made of smooth white material that looked like plastic, but felt like metal. The others climbed down behind him. When they were all together, lights suddenly flickered on overhead. Emergency lighting, dim but enough to see by. The corridor stretched ahead into the distance. "Someone left the power on," Doug said. They walked for 20 minutes. The corridor sloped downward, taking them deeper under the ice. They passed rooms full of old equipment. Computers from decades ago. Research stations covered in dust. This had been a major facility once with dozens of scientists working here. At the end of the corridor was a massive door. It was made of titanium, at least 10 feet thick. Controls were mounted on the wall beside it. Jake pressed a button. The door began to open. It moved slowly, grinding against ice that had formed in the mechanisms. When it was halfway open, Jake stepped through. And there it was. The chamber beyond was enormous. It had to be half a mile across and Jake Morrison stood in the command center of the Sentinel and stared at the holographic displays. The symbols had changed to English, but that didn't mean he understood what he was looking at. The screen showed complex diagrams, numbers, and what looked like star charts. Everything was alien and overwhelming. "Authorization required," the text on the main display repeated. A panel on the console glowed with soft blue light. It looked like a handprint scanner. Jake placed his hand on the panel. Nothing happened. He waited for 10 seconds. Still nothing. He lifted his hand and tried again. Same result. Amy stepped forward and tried next. Her hand fit perfectly on the scanner, but the ship didn't respond. Lisa tried. Then Doug. One by one, every member of the team placed their hand on the scanner. The ship rejected all of them. Maybe it's looking for a specific person, Lisa said. Someone descended from the original builders? Or maybe it's broken, Doug said. This thing has been sitting under ice for who knows how long. Parts probably don't work anymore. Jake felt frustration building in his chest. They had come so far. They had stolen an alien ship, flown across Antarctica, dug through ice and found this incredible vessel, and now they couldn't even turn it on. He looked at the display again. Threat confirmed, it said. Hostile presence detected. The ship knew the Zathran were here. It knew Earth was in danger, but it wouldn't help unless someone gave it authorization. What kind of authorization? What was it waiting for? Jake thought about his grandfather's report. Colonel Henry Morrison had written that the ship responded to external threats. It was designed to protect Earth, but from what? And why would it need permission to defend the planet? Maybe that was the point. Maybe the ship had to know that humans wanted to fight, that they chose to resist rather than surrender. Jake spoke out loud, feeling foolish but not knowing what else to do. We're here because we won't give up. Our world surrendered, but we didn't. We came looking for you because we want to fight back. If you're supposed to protect Earth, then help us. We're ready. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the entire ship hummed. It was a deep sound, felt more than heard. The vibration went through the floor and into Jake's bones. All around them, systems began to activate. Lights brightened. The holographic displays changed, showing new information. The command chair in the center of the room glowed. Authorization accepted, the display read. Systems initializing. Defensive protocols enabled. Amy grabbed Jake's arm. You did it. The ship accepted us. But Jake wasn't sure what he had done. He had just spoken honestly. Maybe that was all the ship needed. Not a specific person, but a specific choice. The choice to fight. The ship's artificial intelligence, if that's what it was, began communicating through the displays. It showed them a tutorial of sorts, simple diagrams explaining the basic controls. The command chair was the key. Whoever sat there would interface directly with the ship's systems. They would be able to control weapons, navigation, shields, and everything else. Lisa studied the diagrams carefully. This is incredible. The ship doesn't use traditional controls. It reads neural patterns, thoughts. The pilot thinks about where they want to go and the ship goes there. That sounds dangerous, Doug said. What if you think about something by accident? The system has safeguards, Lisa said, pointing at another diagram. It only responds to intentional commands. Strong focused thoughts, not random ideas. Jake looked at the command chair. Someone had to sit there. Someone had to take control of this massive warship and somehow figure out how to use it. He was the ranking officer. The responsibility was his. Before he could move toward the chair, alarms began blaring throughout the ship. The displays changed, showing an aerial view of the ice above them. Zathran vessels were approaching. Dozens of them. They detected us, Amy said. The ship waking up must have sent out some kind of signal. Doug checked his rifle, even though they all knew human weapons wouldn't do anything against Zathran technology. How long until they get here? 10 minutes, Lisa said, reading the countdown on the display. Maybe less. Jake ran to the command chair and sat down. The moment he did, the chair adjusted itself to fit his body. Restraints extended from the arms, not trapping him but holding him steady. Something touched the back of his neck. It was cold and felt alive. Then information flooded into his mind. He could suddenly see through the ship's sensors. He could feel the power flowing through its systems. He knew exactly how deep they were under the ice, how many Zathran ships were approaching, and what weapons those ships carried. It was overwhelming. Too much information all at once. Jake closed his eyes and tried to focus. The ship seemed to sense his confusion and adjusted. The flow of information slowed to something manageable. Are you okay? Amy asked. She sounded far away, even though she was standing right next to him. I'm fine, Jake said. His voice echoed strangely in his own ears. I can feel everything. The whole ship. It's like it's part of me now. He thought about moving and the Sentinel responded. The support structures holding it in place released. The massive vessel settled onto the ice with a gentle impact. We need to get out of this cavern, Jake said. The Zathran are coming. If we stay down here, we're trapped. He focused on the concept of rising. The ship understood. Its engines came online with a sound like distant thunder. Power surged through systems that hadn't been active in countless years. The hull began to glow with heat. Above them, 2 miles of ice stood between the Sentinel and the surface. Jake didn't know if the ship could break through that much frozen water, but the ship did. It knew exactly what to do. The Sentinel rose. It moved upward with incredible force, melting the ice around it. The ancient chamber collapsed as the ship ascended. Millions of tons of ice and rock fell into the space they left behind. The ship created its own tunnel, pushing through the ice like it wasn't even there. Jake could feel the resistance, but the Sentinel was unstoppable. It had been built for this, built to survive anything. They broke through the surface in an explosion of ice and steam. The Sentinel emerged into the Antarctic daylight like a sea monster breaching from the depths. Chunks of frozen water the size of buildings flew in every direction. The ship rose into the air, hovering 30 feet above the shattered ice field. The Zathran fleet was right there, waiting for them. Jake counted 47 ships. They ranged from small fighters to massive cruisers. All of them had weapons pointed at the Sentinel. A communication came through. The ship translated it automatically. A Zathran commander's face appeared on one of the displays. He had scales that shimmered bronze and gold. His eyes were like a snake's. "Unknown vessel," the commander said. "You will power down your systems and surrender immediately. Failure to comply will result in your destruction." Jake thought about how to respond. The ship opened a communication channel. "This is Earth's ship Sentinel. You're invading our planet. Leave now or we'll make you leave." The Zathran commander's face twisted into what might have been a smile. "Your planet has already surrendered, and one ship cannot defeat a fleet. Power down now and you may survive." Jake could feel the Sentinel's weapons through his connection to the ship. He understood what they could do. The ship had railguns that fired projectiles at nearly the speed of light. It had energy cannons that could cut through anything. It had defensive systems that made the Zathran shields look like tissue paper. But Jake had never fought in space before. He had never commanded a warship. He was a ground soldier who had spent his career jumping out of planes and clearing buildings. This was completely different. The Zathran commander's smile faded. "You have 5 seconds to comply." Jake made his decision. The Sentinel was built to fight, and so was he. Fire, Jake thought. The ship responded instantly. Railguns along the hull fired in sequence. The sound was deafening even inside the ship. The projectiles moved so fast they were invisible. They simply appeared inside the Zathran ships, having punched through shields and armor like they weren't there. 3 Zathran cruisers exploded. They didn't catch fire or break apart slowly. They just ceased to exist. One moment they were there. The next moment there was only expanding clouds of debris. The remaining Zathran ships scattered. They began firing everything they had at the Sentinel. Plasma bolts, missiles, energy beams. The attacks came from every direction. The Sentinel's shields activated automatically. A shimmering barrier appeared around the hull. The Zathran weapons hit the shields and simply vanished. They didn't bounce off or explode. They were absorbed and converted into energy that fed back into the ship's systems. "They're making us stronger," Jake realized. Every attack was giving the Sentinel more power. He focused on the enemy ships. The Sentinel's targeting systems locked onto 12 targets simultaneously. Jake thought about firing, and the energy cannons spoke. Brilliant blue beams shot out from the ship's hull. They swept across the sky like searchlights. Every ship they touched fell apart. The battle lasted less than 5 minutes. The Zathran fleet fought hard. They tried everything. They focused fire on single points of the shields. They launched boarding pods. They attempted to jam the Sentinel systems. Nothing worked. The ship was too advanced, too powerful, too perfect. The Sentinel broke through Earth's atmosphere and emerged into the darkness of space. Jake Morrison felt the transition through his connection to the ship. The resistance of air disappeared. They were floating now, moving through the void with perfect silence. Ahead of them, the Zathran fleet waited in orbit. 47 massive ships arranged in a defensive formation around the planet. Each vessel was 3 times larger than the biggest aircraft carrier humans had ever built. They bristled with weapons. Their hulls glowed with the energy of active shield systems. Jake could see all of it through the Sentinel's sensors. The ship fed him information directly into his mind. Enemy positions, weapon types, shield frequencies, engine signatures. Everything he needed to fight a space battle he had no training for. "There are so many of them," Amy said. She was standing beside the command chair, watching the holographic display. The rest of the team was scattered around the command center, all of them staring at the screens with a mixture of fear and awe. Lisa was working at one of the consoles trying to understand the ship's systems. The Sentinel is more advanced than anything the Zathran have, but we're still just one ship against an entire fleet. The odds are terrible. Doug checked his rifle again. It was a useless gesture. Personal weapons meant nothing in a space battle. But Jake understood. Doug needed something familiar to hold on to. They all did. We don't have to destroy all of them, Jake said. We just have to make them think twice about staying here. A communication signal came through. The Sentinel automatically translated it. A voice filled the command center, deep and harsh. Unknown vessel. This is Fleet Commander Kreth of the Zathran Empire. You have destroyed a minor patrol fleet. This has earned you the right to speak before you die. Identify yourself. Jake thought about responding. The ship opened a channel. This is Commander Jake Morrison of Earth. Your invasion ends today. Leave our planet or we'll destroy every ship you have. There was silence for a moment. Then Kreth laughed. It was a terrible sound, like rocks grinding together. Brave words from one ship. I have 47 capital vessels. Each one carries enough firepower to burn a continent. Your planet surrendered. You have no authority to make demands. I'm not making demands, Jake said. I'm giving you a choice. Leave or fight. It's that simple. Another pause. Jake could feel the Sentinel's anticipation through their connection. The ship wanted to fight. It had been built for this. Every system was optimized for combat. The weapons were charged and ready. The shields were at maximum strength. Very well, Kreth said. You will make an interesting target practice for my crews. Attack formation. All ships engage. The Zathran fleet moved. The massive vessels adjusted their positions, creating overlapping fields of fire. They were coordinating for a simultaneous strike. Jake realized they were going to hit the Sentinel with everything at once. They were taking him seriously after what happened in Antarctica. They're charging weapons, Lisa called out. Energy readings are spiking across the entire fleet. 30 seconds until they fire. Jake thought about defense. The Sentinel responded. Additional shield layers activated around the hull. The ship began moving, accelerating to speeds that made the orbital mechanics display spin wildly. They were dodging before the enemy even fired. The Zathran attack came like a wall of light. Plasma bolts, energy beams, and missiles launched from every ship in the fleet. Hundreds of weapons firing at once, all aimed at the same target. The Sentinel danced through the barrage. Jake wasn't controlling it directly. The ship's systems handled the maneuvering. His job was to think about where he wanted to be, and the Sentinel made it happen. They spiraled, rolled, and accelerated in patterns no human pilot could manage. Most of the enemy fire missed. The attacks that connected hit the shields and vanished, absorbed by defensive systems that converted the energy into fuel for the ship's own weapons. They can't hurt us, Amy said. She sounded amazed. Not yet, Jake said. But they're learning. Watch. The Zathran were adjusting their strategy. Instead of firing wildly, they were beginning to focus fire on specific points of the shields. They were trying to overwhelm one section and create a breakthrough. It was a good strategy, but the Sentinel was smarter. The shields automatically reinforced weak points, drawing power from areas that weren't under attack. The ship had been designed by someone who understood defensive warfare better than the Zathran ever would. Jake decided it was time to stop playing defense. He focused on the nearest Zathran capital ship. The Sentinel's targeting systems locked on. Jake thought about firing, and the railgun spoke. The projectiles crossed the distance between ships in less than a second. They punched through the Zathran vessel's shields like they weren't there. The enemy ship's hull ruptured in a dozen places. Atmosphere vented into space. The vessel began to spin, losing control. Direct hit, Lisa said. Their shields didn't even slow us down. Jake targeted another ship. The railguns fired again. Another hit. This time the target's reactor detonated. The explosion was massive, bright enough to cast shadows inside the Sentinel's command center. The Zathran fleet was spreading out now, trying to avoid being easy targets. But Jake could track all of them. The Sentinel could engage multiple enemies simultaneously. He targeted 5 ships at once. The energy cannons fired, blue beams cutting through space. 3 ships were destroyed instantly. 2 survived but were heavily damaged. We're winning, Doug said. We're actually winning. But Jake could see something the others couldn't. Through his connection to the ship, he sensed the Zathran were preparing something new. They were moving their remaining vessels into a strange formation. Power readings were spiking in all of them simultaneously. "They're linking their weapon systems," Lisa said, reading her console. "They're going to combine their firepower into a single massive attack." Jake understood immediately. Individually, the Zathran ships couldn't break through the Sentinel's shields. But if they all fired at exactly the same moment, focusing on the exact same point, they might be able to overwhelm the defenses. It was a desperate strategy. It required perfect coordination, and it would leave them vulnerable while they charged their weapons. But if it worked, the Sentinel would be destroyed. "How long until they fire?" Jake asked. 45 seconds, Lisa said. Jake had to make a decision. He could try to destroy as many ships as possible before they attacked. But he couldn't get all of them in 45 seconds. Or he could run, take the Sentinel away from Earth and come back later. But running meant abandoning the planet. It meant letting the Zathran continue their occupation. Everything he had fought for would be wasted. There was a third option, a crazy option, but the Sentinel could do it. Jake could feel the capability through his connection to the ship. It would require perfect timing and perfect trust in the vessel's systems. "Hold on to something," Jake said. "This is going to be rough." He thought about acceleration. "Maximum acceleration," the Sentinel responded. The ship's engines flared to full power. They shot forward like a bullet, heading straight toward the center of the Zathran formation. "What are you doing?" Amy shouted. Jake didn't answer. He was too focused. The distance to the enemy fleet closed rapidly. 10,000 kilometers, 5,000, 1,000. The Zathran ships loomed in front of them, massive and threatening. "They're firing!" Lisa yelled. All 42 remaining Zathran ships fired at once. Their combined weapons unleashed enough energy to vaporize a small moon. The attack converged on a single point in space, the exact spot where the Sentinel had been a fraction of a second ago. But the Sentinel wasn't there anymore. At the last possible moment, Jake thought about stopping. The ship responded instantly, killing its velocity with impossible precision. They hung in space while the Zathran attack flew past them harmlessly. Now they were inside the enemy formation, surrounded by Zathran capital ships that had just expended most of their weapon charges on a single massive attack. They needed time to recharge. Time Jake wasn't going to give them. Fire everything, Jake thought. The Sentinel unleashed its full arsenal. Railguns, energy cannons, and weapons Jake didn't even have names for. The ship attacked in every direction at once, engaging multiple targets simultaneously. The Zathran ships were too close to each other, too tightly packed in their attack formation. When one ship exploded, the debris damaged its neighbors. When energy beams missed one target, they hit another behind it. The enemy's coordination became their weakness. Ship after ship fell apart. Some exploded. Some broke in half. Some just went dark, their systems overwhelmed. The battle became a chaotic melee with the Sentinel at the center, dealing death in every direction. Jake lost track of individual targets. He just kept firing, kept moving, kept thinking about destroying the invaders. The ship understood his intent and made it happen. They were perfectly synchronized now. He wasn't commanding the Sentinel anymore. They were fighting together as one. When it was over, Jake realized he was breathing hard. The command chair's restraints were digging into his arms. Sweat covered his face, but they were alive. And the Zathran fleet was gone. Debris filled the space around them. Escape pods dotted the area, small lights in the darkness where Zathran crews had abandoned their ships. 3 days after the battle, the Sentinel was in orbit above Earth while the world below tried to make sense of what had happened. Cities that had been occupied were free again. Governments that had surrendered were trying to figure out what to do next. And everyone wanted to know about the mysterious ship that had appeared from Antarctica and destroyed an alien fleet. Jake Morrison sat in the command center and watched the news broadcasts on one of the holographic displays. Every channel was talking about the Sentinel. Reporters were calling it a miracle. Scientists were calling it impossible. Military analysts were calling it the most powerful weapon ever created. They were all right. Lisa Yang was working at one of the consoles deep in the ship's database. She had barely slept since the battle. The Sentinel systems contained information that would take years to fully understand. Technology, history, maps, and data about civilizations Jake had never heard of. "You need to see this," Lisa said suddenly. She pulled up a holographic image in the center of the room. It showed a star map with hundreds of marked locations. "These are coordinates. The Sentinel has them stored in what I think is a priority index. Places we're supposed to go. Amy Foster came over to look. She had been coordinating with Earth's military forces, trying to organize a proper defense network now that the planet was free. Supposed to go according to who? According to whoever built this ship, Lisa said. Or whoever left it here for us to find. Jake stood up from the command chair. His connection to the ship was getting easier each time he sat there. The overwhelming flood of information was becoming manageable. The Sentinel was learning to communicate with him better. Or maybe he was learning to understand it better. He looked at the star map. Most of the coordinates were in the solar system. A few were on Earth itself. Others were scattered across the asteroid belt on Mars, on the moons of Jupiter and Saturn. What are these locations? Jake asked. I think they're caches, Lisa said. Like the Sentinel. Places where technology or information was hidden. The ship wants us to find them. Doug Martinez entered the command center carrying coffee. He had found the ship's food synthesizer, which could produce a reasonable imitation of coffee if you didn't think too hard about where it came from. He handed cups to Jake and Amy. So we're going on a treasure hunt, Doug said. Across the entire solar system. Looking for ancient technology left by mysterious aliens who may or may not have been human ancestors from the future, or something equally weird. That's about right, Jake said. He selected one of the closer coordinates on the map. It was on Mars in a region called Valles Marineris. The ship's database had a brief note attached to the location. It read simply, Secondary Facility. Research and Development. Let's start there, Jake said. We need to understand what we're dealing with. Who built the Sentinel? Why did they leave it on Earth? What were they preparing for? A communication alert interrupted them. The ship's systems automatically opened the channel. A woman's face appeared on the display. She was in her 50s, wearing a military uniform. Jake recognized her immediately. General Hayes, he said. You're alive. Patricia Hayes smiled. It was a tired smile, but genuine. I'm alive, Commander. Thanks to you. NORAD was hit hard in the initial attack, but we had deep bunkers. We've been hiding and coordinating what resistance we could, until you showed up with that ship and changed everything. Your message led me to the Sentinel, Jake said. How did you know about it? I had access to old files, Patricia said. Projects that were buried so deep most people forgot they existed. When the invasion started, I remembered the Antarctic facility. I remembered reports about something down there that could defend Earth. I gambled that you could find it. It was a good gamble. Patricia's expression became serious. Jake, the world is in chaos. The Zathran occupation lasted less than a month, but it was enough to break our command structures. We need leadership. We need someone to coordinate the defense. The president is asking for you. For me? Jake said. I'm just a soldier. I found the ship, but that doesn't make me qualified to run anything. You're the only person who can pilot the Sentinel, Patricia said. You're connected to it in a way no one else is. That makes you the most important person on Earth right now. Like it or not, you're in charge. Jake looked at his team. Amy was nodding slightly. She thought he should accept. Lisa looked worried. Doug just shrugged as if to say it was Jake's decision. I'll do what I can, Jake said finally. But I'm not a politician. I'm not going to sit in meetings while the Zathran regroup and plan another attack. We need to prepare. We need to find the other caches. We need to build a real defense. Agreed, Patricia said. I'll coordinate with the governments and tell them you're leading the defense effort. What's your first move? Mars, Jake said. There's something there. Another facility. We're going to check it out, Patricia nodded. Be careful, Commander. We don't know what else is out there. And we don't know if the Zathran are the only threat. The transmission ended. Jake stood in the command center and felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. He had wanted to fight back against the invasion. He had succeeded beyond anything he imagined. But now everyone was looking to him for answers he didn't have. We should get moving, Amy said gently. The sooner we understand what the Sentinel is and where it came from, the better. Jake returned to the command chair. The restraints extended automatically. He felt the cold touch of the interface at the back of his neck. Information began flowing again. The ship was ready to go wherever he wanted. He focused on Mars. The Sentinel's engines activated smoothly. They began accelerating away from Earth, heading toward the red planet. The journey would take several hours at the speeds they could maintain safely within the solar system. Jake used the time to explore more of the ship's database. Lisa helped him navigate the strange organization system. They found star charts that showed civilizations scattered across the galaxy. Some were marked as friendly, some as neutral, and some were marked with a symbol that the ship translated as hostile. The Zathran were there, marked as hostile, but they were just one of many. There were dozens of species marked the same way, hundreds of worlds, thousands of ships. The galaxy is crowded, Lisa said, and most of them aren't friendly. Why didn't anyone contact us before? Amy asked. If there are so many civilizations out there, why was Earth ignored? Jake found a file that seemed to answer that question. It was labeled Protected Zone and contained a map showing a bubble of space around Earth's solar system. According to the notes, this region had been marked as off-limits by some kind of ancient treaty. Species were forbidden from interfering with the development of civilizations inside protected zones. We were in a nature preserve, Doug said. Like a national park. The Zathran broke the rules by invading. Which means other species might see us differently now, Jake said. We're not protected anymore. We're just another civilization trying to survive. The ship's sensors detected Mars ahead. The red planet filled the display, rust-colored and barren. Jake had seen pictures of Mars his whole life, but seeing it in person from orbit was different. It looked dead. Nothing moved on the surface except dust storms. The coordinates led them to Valles Marineris, a canyon system that stretched thousands of miles across the planet's surface. The ship's sensors swept the area and detected something underground. A structure, buried under rocks and sand. There's definitely something down there, Lisa said. Metal, ceramics, materials that don't match the natural geology. It's big too. Maybe as big as the Sentinel's hiding place in Antarctica. Jake brought the ship down toward the surface. The Sentinel could handle planetary atmospheres easily, even Mars's thin air. They landed near the coordinates, settling onto reddish sand. The team suited up in the environmental suits they had found in the ship's storage. The Sentinel had equipment for dozens of different environments. Apparently, whoever built it expected the crew to visit many different worlds. They walked across the Martian surface toward the detected structure. The gravity was lighter than Earth's, making each step a careful bounce. The landscape was nothing but rocks and sand in every direction. If there was a facility here, it was buried deep. Doug found the entrance. It was a hatch built into the wall of the canyon, covered by centuries of dust. They cleared it away and opened the seal. Stairs led down into darkness. The facility inside was similar to the Antarctic base, but bigger. Much bigger. The corridors were wide enough to drive trucks through. The rooms were massive, and unlike the Antarctic facility, which had been built by humans to study the Sentinel, this place was original. Built by whoever had left the ship for Earth. They found laboratories filled with equipment Jake didn't understand. Workshops with tools designed for hands that weren't quite human. Storage rooms containing materials that Lisa couldn't identify. And at the center of the facility, they found a data archive. It was a room filled with glowing crystals arranged in precise geometric patterns. When Jake approached, the crystals activated. A hologram appeared showing a figure. It was humanoid but not human. Taller, with features that were almost familiar but not quite right.